So I've already rewritten this script in about 4 different ways because it's hard to get across in such a short amount of time exactly why I don't like this game. So instead of going into the particulars of the game design and the choices that I don't like, I think it'd be better to just start by framing this as a game that just isn't for me. I understand that there are some people that really like this game, but I could not be in a more opposite camp, and I'd rather frame the discussion around what I look for in a good Pokémon game and why this is such a hard pill for me to swallow. So the 3D era of Pokemon has been a pretty mixed bag, although I definitely feel as though I view it a bit differently from most people. An example of this is that I actually like Sword and Shield quite a bit versus something like Sun and Moon, which, while probably a slightly more aesthetically pleasing game, I think it commits a lot of the same sins that Sword and Shield is accused of, but to a more egregious level, whereas Sword and Shield, and especially in the case of its DLCs, has far more redeeming qualities that gave it a staying power that I haven't really had in a Pokemon game since Generation 5, so I did like that one a lot. It's by no means perfect, obviously. It has a lot of problems, but I also think the same can be said for pretty much every Pokemon game since X and Y released. But the rest of my thoughts on Sword and Shield is a story for another day. As for the most recent games, let's start with Legends Arceus, a game that I really liked, so much so that I'm pretty confident in saying it's my favorite Pokemon game since Black and White 2. I just really love the new direction that it seemed was being taken with this series. Pokemon, to me, is mostly just a vibe. It's the whole reason I love it. It's not anything super serious or deep or meaningful in anything but a nostalgic way. I just like the world and the creature designs, and I care so much more about theming and world building than I do about the actual plot. The only time that I can think of that the story has ever remotely mattered to me was when I was an avid reader of the manga. The games are just not something I come to for that experience, and Legends Arceus didn't really deliver in that way, but that context is why it didn't bother me either. I was so much more engaged in just the idea of this setting and the disparate biomes that you got to run around in, and this entire idea of you as more of this poke biologist and field researcher than the usual Pokemon trainer setup. Battling was completely de-emphasized this time around, and while it does exist, it's more supplemental rather than the core feature of the game. And that's not to say that some of the core mechanics like catching and the stealth system are even all that good, but it's the way everything exists in service of the larger goal of the game that makes it interesting to me. It's so much more focused on delivering this very specific experience of catching and cataloging Pokemon, ironically so much more effectively than every other game where the Pokédex is presented to the player as this incredibly crucial aspect. And going all the way back to Generation 1, I just never gave a shit about the Pokédex, because there's always been something that exists to suck the fun out of the entire idea of catching them all. Whether it was the cost prohibitiveness of the early days and needing multiple games and systems and that stupid link cable that absolutely no one in any of my friend groups had, or all of the obnoxious event exclusive Pokemon in the Wi-Fi era, just the way Pokemon has been manufacturing FOMO long before free-to-play and live service games ever got their hands on the concept just soured me from the get-go from the entire Pokédex hunt, and it's never been what I played Pokemon for. Legends Arceus is the only time in this entire series where I actually felt as though I wasn't just compelled to do it, but it was the thing to do. It was the entire point of the game. I wasn't just hunting for favorites or training my team for endgame battles, I only cared about the Pokédex, and I just love that this was seemingly the direction the Legends series was going to go as a way of supplementing the main series of games, which have become so stuck within this monumentally unwieldy, tight and poorly conceived IP release cycle that it can never break free from. And that despite Legends Arceus' weaknesses in its wordy storytelling and its frankly bad visual design, I just thought, okay, at least there's this. If the main series is never going to improve, I have something like this to look forward to. This was further cemented, in my mind, in just how much I disliked Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and the fact that it seemed to gather a far warmer reception from players than what Sword and Shield had gotten, which seems to me as though that's the trend future games are going to follow. I just didn't enjoy it much. I mean, it wasn't horrible or anything. It had some good moments. It really was the best Pokemon plot that the series has ever had, or well, at least 2/3 of it anyway. Everything involving Nemona and Arven was good stuff. The rest I really could have done without, but whatever. It's a pretty low bar to clear in the grand scheme of things, and they did manage to do that. Generation 5 could have been the end-all be-all, but for all of Black and White 2's greatness, the sequel did not do the first game justice in this particular area, but it's fine, because again, story isn't really what I play these games for, and that's why Scarlet and Violet just fell so flat for me. The aesthetics in particular, or the complete lack thereof, was just so putrid that even by comparison, as low-res and ugly as Legends Arceus is, at least it had some sort of personality to it. Scarlet and Violet is pretty awful to look at and run around in. It always played like garbage, so much so that it made the new Terra Raid battles, which replaced the Dynamax battles from Sword and Shield, just one of the worst experiences I've ever had in a video game. Every time I set my foot into one of those, I regretted it instantly. It was such a clusterfuck in every way and just glitchy, like you'd get 1 or 2 attacks off and then you go an entire minute without even being able to input anything as the timer continuously counted down, and you'd wonder if the game froze or had broken in some way or you disconnected, and then suddenly the battle was over and you won and you felt as though nothing actually happened because the entire thing ran like shit. And it was kind of a microcosm of the larger experience that was Scarlet and Violet. The best thing about this game was all of the stuff that I just don't play Pokemon for. Like, I don't care about the dialogue. These are the last JRPGs in the entire universe I would go to for this stuff. It's the whole reason I actually hung around Pokemon for so long, because the genre is usually a massive time commitment and it requires you to pay so much attention that you have to set aside hours at a time to have fun with JRPGs. And that's fine. That's not a fault necessarily. It's just kind of an accessibility issue. And I liked the fact that Pokemon was so pick up and play for this reason. And now it seems as though they're completely moving away from that, but into territory where their stories are, I mean, fine now. They're fine. They actually do some things, but this is at a time where the rest of the JRPG genre is flying away from the old standard in leaps and bounds. So it's somehow more poorly timed than ever for them to take this direction. And we're left with Pokemon games that are continuing down this path of doing exactly what I really wish they'd stop doing. Which leads us to Legends ZA, the supposed subject of today's video, and a game that I barely managed to grit my teeth and slog through. This game is a textbook example of the wrong way to appeal to me, personally, when making a Pokemon game. It's like it completely unlearned every single thing I liked about the first Legends game and then piled on everything that I just didn't care about from Scarlet and Violet and mashed it all together into this bland and lifeless mess of a half-baked concept that just never fully came together. Once again, the story is the best part this time around, but I still wouldn't call it good. The characters in particular, I would say, are way more insufferable than the Paldean crew, which I guess does kind of fit in with the theme of Kalos. Now this region has both of the worst sets of rivals in my opinion. There is one really good character, but he doesn't appear until like 12 hours into the game, so what's the point? Everybody's already memed on how long and unnecessary the opening section of the game is and how it refuses to let the player have any agency whatsoever until like 3 or 4 hours in. It totally torpedoes the replay value even if I wanted to give this game a second chance. The capture mechanics have been so de-emphasized that it's closer to the Scarlet and Violet system than it is to Legends Arceus despite the real-time combat. And then there's the battle system, which like this is supposed to be the best part of the game, but it's not good. It's novel, it's different, but I wouldn't call it well executed. Every interesting idea, such as defensive timing windows with things like Protect and Detect, and balancing super strong moves with long cooldowns and other various quirks, just kind of feels plugged in and half-baked. Like, I get that Pokemon has such a massive and unwieldy meta that overhauling the entire combat system is too massive a task to take it all into consideration, but so much of it still feels like an afterthought that any and all ideas for strategy I had went out the window pretty quickly and pretty early on in my playthrough. And even in my PvP battles, it was essentially just cooldown simulator, ranged attacks only, final destination. And the setting too, man, like I don't even know a single person that liked the idea and concept behind Lumiose the first time it came around. I get that it's supposed to be based on one of the most beloved and beautiful cities in the world, but Lumiose itself was just a generic circular city that was honestly very annoying to navigate because of how little it had in the way of identifiable landmarks outside of the Prism Tower at the center, which isn't a great reference point for finding your way around, by the way. In Legends ZA, it does have more diversity to it from a geographical and infrastructural standpoint, sure, but visually, it's not a ton better than the 3DS game from 2014. It's just bigger. Like, I get that it's higher definition and it has richer textures, but it's also very much full of samey and basic landmarks with little personality. Most of the notable locations are just parks. Many parks. There are so many parks. They're most of the wild zones. There's like 4, maybe 5 locations in the entire game that I would identify as actually standout. There's like this sewer area, although once you actually go into it through the loading zone, it becomes extremely underwhelming. There's this randomly snowed and iced over zone that they can just cram all of the ice types into. There's the hotel itself, which I always hated going back to because it meant I had to play the game less. Then, of course, the Prism Tower is still there, and it's the central fixture, but completely inaccessible for most of the game. And then there's the place with the Syndicate guys, but Even that, much like a few of the other quote-unquote fixtures throughout the game, would be pretty damn hard to track down without waypoints because, again, this city is just annoying to navigate. I found myself walking in circles and getting turned around so often to the point where it would just make me stop and sigh and wonder what I was doing running around this vapid map. And unfortunately, it just gave me nothing. Like, I see why people like this game. It does some things very well, at the expense of others, of course, but that's kind of just what Pokemon is now. There's no conceivable way to expect them to try in every area anymore. Not with the main series, anyway. I feel like new Pokemon Snap is the only Pokemon-adjacent game in almost 15 years that actually felt as though it was trying to be a complete product in every sense and do everything it set out to do. That's just the reality of Pokemon now. But nothing that Legends EA set out to do and actually accomplished was for me. Very little of it sparked joy, and it wasn't just because I was comparing it in my mind to its predecessor. A very common argument against reviewers is that you're not supposed to judge a game as what you want it to be. You're only supposed to judge a game as it is. And sure, there is a lot of truth to that. But even if I take this game at face value, I still didn't have a good time with it. I know a lot of people have that Pokemon game that just kind of ended up being the final straw for them, and I think I've been more patient and lenient than most. But barring any radical shifts in another direction that I really don't expect Game Freak to make literally ever because I've known how this works for a long time now, I think this was my final straw. And that's why I'm giving Legends EA a 3 out of 10.